All right, let's go ahead and get started with today. Thank you guys for coming out. Um, I apologize as yes, we have Danny and Steph and a few others from our state team here. But my sidekick is not here today. She had an emergency with her family, so she is taking care of that. So we will see what I can do running. All right. It has been a minute since I ran one of these. So Alex ran our last one a couple of months ago, and she did a fantastic job as I was finishing up our federal reports. In fact, that is what we are going to talk about today is our federal reports, along with a couple of other things that we have. But as we get into this, a couple of things I want to remind you guys of. Just your data maintenance. Remember that inside of our data or inside of our policy and procedure guide, we do ask that data gets entered on a regularly basis. We ask that it does get entered every 2 weeks. So my first question is, have you logged into UASIS to enter data? I do see that every once in a while that we just don't have users who log in on a regular basis. Just make sure that you're logging in and entering your data. Is your data entered in a timely manner? Again, remember, we do ask that this data does get entered in every 2 weeks. Programs sometimes do it more often, and that's fantastic. But we do ask that data does get entered at least in every 2 weeks. And the last question is, have you set an entering EFL for your students? One of the things that we usually find on why students aren't showing up on some of our reports is that their students are missing an entering EFL. And again, entering EFLs can be entered one of two ways. They can be entered primarily by a pre and post or by a pre-test, which is how we want most of our students. But we do know that there are a couple of ways or a couple of instances in which we have to provisionally set a student's entering EFL. And so if you do set that, please make sure that you do that on a timely manner for those students so that we can then capture and see what the students are doing inside of our program. So let's go ahead and jump in. There is one feedback or one piece of information that has come out recently, and that's with our CASAS testing scores. So CASAS is updating the scoring conversion table on level A tests on goals, reading goals, math goals, reading steps, and listening steps. Originally, when a student scored a 0 through 3, they were not being placed in any sort of functioning level. That has now been changed to where a scoring on a 0 through 3 will automatically place you on the lowest level score. It won't say that you're out of range. This change is only applied to CASAS level A tests. Inside of UASIS, if you do enter any of those lower levels, it will also give the student an NRS level 1. So UASIS wise, that's in there, but as you do enter or as you do test students, you will see that change happen. Okay. Let's jump into reports. There are a lot of reports, and again, these reports are going to expand. So I can do the same training probably next year and probably will. And at that point, I may have to split this into 2 different trainings as there's going to be a lot of new reports. However, one thing inside of UASIS is all reports are permission based. So it doesn't matter, you can select as, so for those that give permissions, you can give and take away reports based on what the user needs. So if you don't want users to be running, say, any of the federal tables except table 4, you can give them that functionality. If you don't want them to see pre and post test students because that's not their job, you can take that version away. If you have a tester or one who administers tests, and that's all you want them to do, you can give them just those reports. So again, all reports are permission based. All reports also can be exported into Excel. We are making sure that you can export everything and get the data to be able to expand on it, whether that be to add or remove different students. Maybe you want to combine a couple of different reports, whatever that functionality happens to be, you can always expand. And sometimes those expands for the data. Sometimes they'll bring in additional columns. Sometimes we only have enough room to display certain amount of call or a certain amount of information, but maybe there's additional demographic information for the students behind the scenes that we are pulling. That is one thing that you can export those in order to see those. One thing that I wanted to bring up with the UASIS permissions is as we build new permissions, they must be given. There is no way for me to default and say, oh, here are these X amount of people that do need that permission. But we have been able to figure out a new change, and this change will come out in our next push coming out next week. If a user has all of the permissions that are available to them, the new permission will automatically be given to that user. Um, our expectation or our anticipation is that if a user has all of these permissions, they need whatever new permission is given. So for example, you can see on the screenshot that the student doesn't have the student achievement or the review class hours. Both of these are reports that are inside of the system. To give them, you simply click the checkboxes, hit save down at the bottom, and the user now has those permissions. A user, if the user's already logged in, they will need to log out of UASIS in order to log back in order to get all those new permissions. But if you do have all permissions in the system, the new one will automatically be given to you. I was able to find some code that works. And so again, so mostly the directors and the program admins this will be the default for them. However, if you do have any other users inside of your system that do have all of them, then we will go ahead and give that permission automatically to them. But if the user is missing only one permission because that's not what you want them to have, then know that you will have to manually go in there and give that to the user. All right, let's talk about a couple of reports. We're going to go through all of the federal reports to kind of show, well, not all of them. We're going to go through the majority of the federal reports to kind of show you what's on them so that you are aware of when we start talking about certain tables inside of NRS that you know what we're talking about. Um, so NRS Table 1 is a good report to kind of see kind of the breakdown demographics of what your programs are. So students on this, so all NRS tables except for one, and I'll go over which one that is, a student must have at 12 hours inside of their period of participation, and the student must have an entering EFL for this that period of participation, which usually means a pretest for the student. If they have both of those things, they will show up on our federal tables. If they don't have one of those two things, then they will not show up on these tables. So if you have students that you are missing, that you're like, I swear that I have everything in there, go double check their page, make sure the checkbox for 12 hours and the entering EFL are checked. If they're missing one of those two, that's why they're not showing up. If you do find that those two are checked, and they're still not showing up on there, please double check, please email me and I'm happy to take a look into that student's record and we can see what's going on. Nikki, you have a quick question?
I do, but maybe this isn't the right time. I was just wondering about the alternative.
Alternatively placed?
Correct. And if that's a thing that's live now or not yet?
No, so I'm not going to get into alternatively placed right now. That is a good question. Alternatively placed students, when we do get into that, they will show up on here. It's similar to a provisional entering EFL. Steph, I saw you come off of mute. You want to go for it?
Yeah, you can, if you apply and are accepted, it's live in that sense. You could apply for it, but nobody has. So there is no alternative placement unless you've applied and been approved.
Okay. So where is the application information?
I can send it. It was in the directors meeting stuff from the fall, but I can resend it to you.
Okay, thank you.
Perfect. That is a good question. I wasn't going to touch on that, but yes. Okay, So with the NRS table, so again, this report talks about entering functioning levels. So depending on what they're entering functioning level, depends on which line they're added. And then this also deals with the students' ethnicity and sex. And again, you'll see that. So you see the first couple columns are American Indian or Alaskan Native. And then below that, you'll see the sex. So we have male, female, non-binary, and no answer. And we have that for each one of those. This simply gives an overall summary of what the program looks like. And then you can, again, these are exportable, so you can take that information and dig into it further if you need. But NRS Table 1 is demographics, just kind of showing your students and who they are. NRS Table 2 deals a little bit more with demographics, but kind of turned a little bit. We deal with participants by age, ethnicity, and sex. And so we look, instead of their functioning level, we're looking kind of the age level. For example, one of the topics we've talked about in directors meeting on a regular basis has been that we've seen an increase in our 16 to 18-year-olds. Those students that are still high school age, but are coming to adult education. This is a report in which we can run to kind of see what that is. So we can compare these numbers to past years and see what our numbers have looked like. This last year when we reported it, we reported 25% of our students in the whole state of Utah are in the 16 to 18 age range. And so we have seen an increase percentage wise, not necessarily number wise, but we have seen an increase. But this is where we get that kind of information. NRS Table 2A is the only report that a student does not need to have or cannot have both a pretest and 12 hours. So if they're missing one of the two, they will show up on here. So really what these are students that kind of came in and what I apologize for the nickname, but I call them our one and dones. They came in, they said that this isn't really for them right now, and they've left. And that's okay. We find that we have these students that come in, but this is also a report that you can run and say, who are these students? Maybe I can contact them and try to get them back. But this shows us kind of, again, our age, ethnicity, and sex on who the students are that are leaving our programs on a more regular basis. Then we can dig into that. And that way you can see maybe you have a high risk population based on this information. So when you have a student that comes in that fits that bill, you can say, okay, I'm going to, work with them to make sure that, we're getting the tutoring, we're getting that one-on-one instruction, whatever you need to do in order to keep those students. But this is information that you would be able to do in order to help that. NRS Table 3 is our last of our demographic tables. This one deals with program types and by age. Program type in this case deals with their functioning level. So when you see ABE, for example, that is ABEs level 1 through 4. ASEs are ABEs level 5 and 6. ESLs are all of our ESL students. IELCEs, for those that have the federal grants that deal with IELCEs, this is where you can see that population as well. And for all programs that run IET programs, there is a subset underneath each one of these that you will see says the program type along with IET, and that shows you which students are enrolled in IET. Both IELCE and IET are additional program types you need to add to your students in order to show up on here. So if you are running either or both programs inside of your own program, and you run this report, which I would highly recommend running on a regular basis so that you can make sure that that information is correct, that's why a student may not be showing up underneath either IET or IELCE, that program type is not added. Any questions about any of our first 4 tables that we have talked about? Okay. All right, let's get into some of the tables that we talk about on a more regular basis. And Stephanie sends a lot of information based on these next few tables. NRS Table 4 is our measurable scale gains by entry level. So the entry level is the student's EFL. And so you'll see that down the side on column A. So again, that's ABE's level 1 through 6 and ESL's level 1 through 6. This will tell you the participants, the number of participants that are in each level. That's your column B. It tells you your total attendance. But then what most programs look and to see kind of, and this is how we can see how your program is doing, is columns E, F, and G are your MSGs. Those are your measurable skill gains. So column E is your EFL MSG, and EFLs we'll talk about in just a second. That's a very lengthy discussion that we will spend 2 minutes, 2 or 3 minutes talking about. HSE MSGs are your GED MS or GEDs or adult education diplomas. So if a student earns either one of those, that's where the student would show up. And the MSG IET and WL is your IETs, so your integrated education training or your workplace learning MSGs. And those are only earned by students that are within those specific program types. A student will only show up on this report once. So of course they will show up under column B as a number of participants, but in columns E through I, so the EFLs or the separated or remainings, a student will only show up on here once, and that is based on whatever their most recent MSG is. So if a student earned an MSG, say they earned a post-test MSG, they earned a level gain, a student will show up under column E. They won't show up anywhere else. If a student earns a post-test and then earns their diploma later, a student will move from one column to another. So they will move from the EFL MSG to the HSE MSG because that's their most recent MSG that the student has had. If two MSGs are earned on the same day, we do put them in a certain order. IET and workplace literacy MSGs are always the highest. So if a student earned multiple and that was one of them, they'll earn that one first. If they've earned, say, their diploma and their level gain on the same day, HSE will come before EFLs. EFLs are kind of the last catch-all MSGs if those are earned all on the same day. So again, it's whatever their most recent one is. Again, with that hierarchical as you look into it. Columns H and J are students who didn't earn an MSG. So if a student ends up in column H, that means they've separated out of our program before they were able to earn an MSG. And that happens, we see that number, and you can kind of see that grand totals out as we continue to go on. Column I is students that are still active inside of our program, but haven't yet earned an MSG. And so again, those are the 5 columns that we look at to see, where the student is. So if you pull this on the Excel report and you do see a student is in one column over the other, always double check to see whatever their most recent one is. You can always do that on the student's homepage. If you expand the pop details, you will see the dates for all the students' MSGs, and you'll be able to see that. Nikki, you got a quick question?
So does entering into like post-secondary not appear on this report? Is that somewhere else?
No, so that is an entering EFL. Give me just a second and we'll talk about all the EFL MSGs. There are 4 ways to earn that, and I was going to talk about that when we talk about our next table.
Okay, sorry.
No, you're good. No, it's a good question because we do talk about a lot of different ways. We talk about entering into post-secondary. We talk about pre and post tests. Some may have heard of Carnegie units as being able to earn, or our most recent one is the GED post test or GED subtests, passing one of those. And so let's go ahead and talk about those. So NRS Table 4A deals with only the EFL MSG, so that educational functioning level gain. We categorize them into 4 different categories, MSG types 1A, B, C, and D. A student can show up on here more than once. What I mean by that is, so if you look at the functioning levels on the side and you look at the number of participants, that gives you your unique count. However, if you look at columns C, E, G, I, and K, a student can show up in there more than once. C and E are your post tests. C is your ELA, so those are your ESL gains and your literacy gains. So say your CASAS reading or those. Column E is your math gains. So that's only your math gains are looking at. Those are broken up into one of two columns. If a student takes a post-test and earns a gain in both reading and math, a student will show up in both the reading and the math column. So you can't add those other columns up in order to get to B just because a student may show up in there more than once. Carnegie units, we only run Carnegie units towards the at the end of the year before we submit. There are some stipulations on what a student has to be. They need to enter at a certain level. They need to earn so many credits within the year. That is a calculation that is just done automatically at the end of each program year. So you won't see that number increase until we're about to submit, and then you can see what additional MSGs. And really, that's all it is if a student hasn't earned an MSG, and they qualify to, and have earned this, then we'll put them in that pot. If you have more questions about the Carnegie units, I'm happy to discuss it, but I don't want to go a whole lot into that one, as that one's not one that is earned very often. Transition into post-secondary, Nikki, this is the question that you had. So if a student transitions from adult education into post-secondary within the program year, that can count as a student's MSG for the time that they were in adult education. So that's one that comes every so often. And as I do my data matching, you can see that one populate. But that is a transition to post-secondary EFL MSG that can show up. And then our new one that came about this last summer is our GED subtest gain. That is if a student goes and takes a or a GED test, and if they pass at least one subtest, doesn't matter which one, at least one of them, the student will show up on here. And so that will help us capture some additional MSGs as well. But again, a student can show up on those additional columns more than one under more than one column. And so you can't add all of those up in order to get what is inside of column B. That's not the way it works. Also, if a student earns, say, their HSE MSG and has earned this EFL MSG, then they will still continue to show up here. They don't need to have their most recent EFL MSG in order to show up on here. I know that was a lot of acronyms and a lot of information. Any questions on table 4 or 4A?
Adam, I have a question really quickly.
Sure.
As far as the entry into post-secondary, I know you said you do the data matches.
Yes.
If we happen to know, say here at the correctional facility, that they've enrolled in Davis Tech or they've enrolled in SLIC or they've done whatever, what type of documentation do you need us to use to put that in on top of verifying that?
Staff?
Sorry, I was distracted. Repeat the
No, it's
question.
okay. What sort of documentation do programs need in order to mark a student as entering into post-secondary?
If you're not doing a data match,
Right.
Correct.
So Chris is the one asking, and if their jail students are entering into post-secondary, like SLIC, for example, and they know that the student is attending and enrolled, what documentation do they need to put in the student's file in order to mark it inside of UASIS?
well, let me go back and look at the dang it, what's the DWS document that has all of them?
The Pearl?
Yeah, the Pearl.
Okay. All right, we will go back.
I'll get back to you.
Okay, yeah,
Thank you.
we'll get back to you on that one. But yes, as Chris was mentioning, you can manually enter into post-secondary. Stephanie will find out what and what documentation is needed. But it is something that you can do, is you can go ahead and enter those. And if you have questions on where to enter them, please contact me through the UASIS webmaster. I can set up a quick meeting and I can show you how to enter that information. Any other questions on these two tables before I move on? Okay. All right, NRS table 4B is a really good report to kind of see how your pre and how your post testing percentages is going. So in order for a student to show up on here, a student needs to both have a pre-test and have needed to have been post-tested within the program year. Um, if a student is rolling over from one program year to the next, the first test that they take in that year will count as a post test because the student already has a post test or has an entering EFL set for them. And so that first test can count as a post test and earn an MSG off of it. However, this will show you kind of what your pre and post test students are. So if a student does show up on here, then you know that the student has both a pre and a post test. You can see the number of hours that have attended. Column D is your number with an EFL. That shows you the number of students who have made a level gain. And again, this is also one report that a student will only show on the columns once. So again, they'll show under the participants, but in D, E, and F, the student will only ever show once. So D is the number with an EFL gain. So that's a student who has made a level gain in their testing. E is the number who is separated before they were able to achieve that. Again, similar to the way column or table 4 was. And column F is the number who remains within that level. And so these are still active students who have not yet separated, but have yet to make gain. We use this report quite a bit as we do some data analysis for programs as well as for the state to see what is our post testing percentage look like. We can see that based on what the number in column B is. So if you wanted to take this, for example, in your own program, you can run table 4 and take that grand total, in this case 204, and you can divide that by the number that was on table 4. And so let me go back quick for what table 4 was. If you look at that, table 4 is 800. So I would be able to take the 204 divided by the 800, and I'll end up at 25% plus a little change. Yes. Sorry, I was trying to math in my head. So you can see that the numbers that I have on here, that we would say that the student that this program has post-tested 25% of their students. Now, in order to figure out what the level gain percentage is, you can take that 151 that's under column B, that grand total, and if you divide it by the 800, that shows you what your overall level gain is against every student. However, if you were interested in saying, hey, for all of those that did post-test, what's my percentage of, students that earn a gain, you can take the 151 divided by the 204, you'll end up at right around 74 or 75 and change percent. And so what I can say is that every 3 out of 4 students that you post-test inside of your program, there's a good chance that they'll make a gain. So that's how I calculate those different percentages. And that's when us at the state level talk to you guys at the programs, or when we're saying, hey, our statewide percentage is at 32%. This is how we've come up with it, as we use these tables in order to do it. So you can come up with the exact same reports, same tables that we do. Okay. Last table 4 that we're going to talk about, there are 4 table 4s, is NRS table 4C. Table 4C is similar to table 4, except it looks at only your students that are distance education students. So students that have those independent hours. So in order for a student to show up on here, one, they need to show up on all of our other federal tables, so 12 hours in a pre-test. And then we need them to have more than half of their hours in the program year need to be distance education, need to be independent hours. And so I look at a student's independent hours to calculate that against their grand total hours. If that's over 50%, I will show them on here. If it's under 50%, the student won't show on here. This just is a subset of table 4 so that we can see, hey, how is your distance education looking? So for those students that do a lot of distance ed, are they performing like we expect them to be? So that's what this table 4 is. It does show a lot of good information, and Steph and I are always kind of intrigued by what the end of the year programs, or what the end of the year state numbers look like. But use your own programs can run this just to kind of see those students that are over 50% What are they doing? You know, is your distance education working? Is there something you need to change? Are they doing really well? Are they earning MSGs like you expect them to be at the same percentage that your regular students are? So there's a lot of additional questions that you can ask. It just kind of depends on what you're really searching for. But Table 4C is a subset of Table 4, dealing specifically with distance education. Any questions on those last two tables? Okay. All right, Table 5 deals with our students that have left us. So students that have left adult education, we do follow-up. We are constantly asking programs, make sure you follow up with your students. We want to make sure social security numbers are inside of the system so that we can do data matches with these programs or with these students. And Table 5 gives us that information. Now, the catch about Table 5 is that it's unique. It's not necessarily, in fact, it's not it looking at students that are attending this program year or whatever program year you're running it. Let me show you this. There are two different cohorts on this table of students. And it depends on which row you are looking at, depends on which cohort you are actually looking at. So for example, the employment second quarter after exit and the median earnings of the second quarter after exit, those are students that have exited the previous school year. So for example, for this 24-25 school year, I would be looking at students who exited your program between 7/1 of 2023 and 6/30 of 2024. And that's the cohort range that I'm looking at specifically for this column or for these two rows. All other rows on that, so employment fourth quarter, when we talk about secondary, we look at a different cohort, and that happens to be between January and December 31st. So for the 24-25 school year, the dates would be January 1st, 2023 through December 31st, 2023. Stephanie, you have a question?
Yeah, in answer to Chris's question, the validation would be either a data match with post-secondary, so that's typically right. If you're not data matching, then you would need to have a copy of the enrollment record, file documentation with notes from program staff, school records, or a transcript or report card.
Perfect. And I will, in fact, I will get that little list that Stephanie just said, and I'll make sure that I send it out so that everybody has a copy of it as well, so that everybody's aware of what needs to happen with those. Talking about post-secondary, because yes, they do show up on table 4A as one of your EFL MSGs as entry into post-secondary. However, if you look at columns, not columns, rows, 4 and 5, they deal also with entry into post-secondary, is row 4, and row 5 is a recognized post-secondary credential. So the same type of things would happen there. So we would still need the same documentation if you are following up with students that way as well. Okay, data matching. I've been asked a couple of different times, and we get and programs ask us all the time, well, when you data match, when do you data match? How often do you do it? When can I make sure that when can I run my table 5 to see what's been updated? So with DWS data matches, I can't data match with DWS until 45 days into each quarter. So usually I run it about around the 15th of the second month of each quarter. I send all of the data to DWS. They turn around, they do the data match, and they send it back. I usually have that information inside of the system and uploaded usually by the 20th. I do some verifications, make sure the data looks right, if there's any questions that I have, and that's why I usually give myself about 4 or 5 days in order to do that. And so what I can comfortably say is that by the end of the second month of each quarter and into that third quarter, our third month, that's when you can look at and see, has my numbers increased? What am I doing? You know, who's been additionally data matched, that kind of stuff. There is one additional Department of Labor or employment data match that happens, and that is called our Swiss data matches. So the Swiss stands for the State Wage Interchange System. What the Swiss system does is Department of Labor's throughout, so each state's DWS, they send their data into a collective database. And that we can data match with that larger database from around the US. What we do find though is that this data is usually almost a quarter behind. So for example, I recently sent a data match to data match for this most recent quarter that has just ended. They've gotten me the information back. I'm putting it up into the system. That will happen along with the upcoming update. However, they said, by the way, your Swiss data match for that same population is not going to be completed until January 30th. So again, I've got to wait almost 4 months into that next quarter before that stuff is updated. And I don't get a ton of data matches back, but that does capture some students that have moved out of state. So I've seen records from Texas, California, Wyoming, Colorado, any state that participates in this Swiss, this interchange, will be able to capture that. And so we don't capture very many, but we do capture some additional students that have moved out of state. But again, that's always an additional way or system behind. That's our DWS, so that's our wage data. Our higher education data matches, I usually match this twice a year. I can't really match it more often as there just wouldn't be an update of information. Higher education runs on those semesters, and so I can't really data match until after that semester has really started. And so I usually match twice a year. I match usually in February, just before we are going to send out all of our state funding numbers to make sure that we can get all that updated accurately. And then I'll data match in September as well, just before we do all of our federal reporting. So I do those twice a year. If you guys, like Chris mentioned, know of students that do it beforehand, before a data match, you're welcome to enter that data, making sure that you use Stephanie's list to make sure that the information is inside of the system. Any questions on table 5, the data matching, the cohorts, anything like that? Okay. I will be honest, table 5 is my most nightmarish report. It's the biggest report, the most detailed, the most confusing. So if you do have questions, I'm happy to help answer them. I have been dealing with NRS tables since I started, so I know them fairly well, and I'm happy to have conversations, definitions, that kind of stuff. Let's talk table 6. Table 6 deals a little more, or goes back to your students. So this is just kind of showing what the students, more demographic information, but not necessarily demographics about it, but who the student is at the time of program entry. So the top part, the participant status, you'll see that this is their employment status. Are they employed? Are they not employed? Are they not in the labor force? What are they? And again, this is collected at the time of the student's enrollment. Their highest degree or level of school completed, and whether it's US based or not. Again, you can see kind of the breakdown of, where your students are a lot of them. What we do see primarily, most of our students are probably US based and in that 9 to 12 with no diploma. But again, your program may be a little bit different. I know we have CBOs that are primarily ESL, and so they may be more non-US based. And so you can kind of see a breakdown of what your program, of who the students are. Your program type, so that second to last option, family literacy and workplace and adult education literacy activities. Those are, again, additional program types that you would need to add to your program or to your students. Again, you will only mark these if you're receiving funding for them from the federal grants. And the last one is your program institutionals. Those are your correctional facilities. So again, that's if you marked where you have a student in correctional and a community correctional or are other institutionalized. You can see what your numbers are there. Again, this is one report that I would recommend running on a regular basis, specifically if you have any of those bottom ones on a, just to make sure that those numbers are up to date. Table 7 does not deal with students at all. Table 7 is your personnel from your program. So you will see that there's a couple of different columns on here. So the first one is what is your student or staff member doing? What were they hired to do? Are they a counselor, paraprofessional, teachers? What are they? Are they full-time, part-time, volunteers? So you can kind of see the breakdown of your staff within your program. How long has staff been at your program? Less than a year, 1 to 3, or 3+. Do you have a lot of new staff that you need to, do any sort of trainings or whatnot? Do they need UASIS trainings, that kind of things? Or do you have a lot of seasoned employers? I have seen over the years that we have transitioned a lot of our staff members to they will stay for 3+ years. If I remember right, Steph, we did a national report on this one, and we have a very high population of staff members that do stay a long time. We don't have a lot of turnover in our staff members. And the last one is their certifications. What kind of certifications do these staff members have? Now, I will say that the staff member, the certifications and the 1 to 3 to 3+ years are dealing specifically with teachers. So we're not looking at all of those roles up at the very top. We're specifically only looking at teachers. That is how NRS breaks it down. And so that's how we look at it. I'm not saying I don't collect the information on all that other stuff for you. And if you do export this into Excel, you can see all those additional ones. But on this overall summary, those additional bottom, what is that, 8 rows are specifically breaking out what your teachers are doing. So just want to keep that clear to where if you say, hey, these numbers aren't adding up, we know. Add them up to your teacher row, and that will add up. They won't add up to anything higher than that. Okay, any questions were regarding table 6 and table 7? Okay. One large report that that we don't really talk about very often, but it's got a lot of information on it, is what is called the State Performance Report. It's called the SPR. It does take a minute to run because it is a lot of data that it's running. And there's a few different things about here in this report that it does do. So one, it breaks down some of the demographic informations that we saw in some of those earlier federal tables. It breaks them down here: male, female, age, gender, ethnicity, that kind of stuff. So it does break it down there. If you look at all of the columns, you will notice that you see some of the repetitiveness. So participants served, your employment rates. So again, that's dealing again with those funky little cohorts. And so you have your participants served, exited. I'll go over that one in just a second. Again, there are multiple cohorts on this one, but it does give you a lot of good information to kind of break down where your students are. One additional thing that the SPR does is those 13 barriers that we collect on our students, this is where it's reported. I say that we're really good about collecting that. In fact, we have been praised by Octane and the NRS group on we do very, very well at collecting this information. We do better than most states. So thank you guys for you being able to push that information, collecting the information, and also accurately putting it into the inside of our data system. But this is where you can see a breakdown of those barriers. So how many staff members do I have that are displaced? How many do I have that are unemployed long-term? That's the kind of information that this system has. So again, it's a lot of information, but it's a lot of good information to kind of break down and see what your program is doing. But I want to give you kind of a quick overall of what these cohorts are. So your participants served and your measurable skill gain columns deals with student pops with this school year. Now, you'll notice that I didn't just simply say students that enrolled in this year, but it's student pops. So if a student shows up, say at the beginning of the year, separates, leaves for that 90 days and starts a new period of participation before the end of the program year, the student will show up on here twice. That is okay. That is the expectation. So this looks at every pop of a student on an individual basis. And so you can't necessarily just simply add the male and female or columns up to come up with say, that 800 that we had before. It's going to come up with a slightly higher number, which actually, let me show you, is on table 4. If you look at column K, I didn't talk about these extra columns, and I apologize for that. These last 4 or 5 columns deals with a student's period of participation. So if a student has more than one pop inside of the program year, they'll show up in these additional columns, or all of their pops will show up. And so you can see down here, we have 803 as the number of participants, but we have 803 for your total pops, meaning that 3 students had a second pop inside of the data set that I ran. When I go back to my SPR, that's the number that you're going to end up having. And so again, keep that in mind as you are looking at this. It's not just a straight over, oh, I had 75 students attend, I have 75 on here. It's how many pops did a student have. So you may have 78 if more than one student had an additional pop. Participants exited is a unique cohort in a sense that these are students that exited between 4-1 and 331 of whatever year that I'm running. So for my 24-25 school year, this is going to be looking at 4-1 of 24 through 331 of 25. Now, the reason for that kind of those 3-month lag is it deals with the period of participation. When we roll over into the new program year, that is the 90-day marker in which we would then separate a student in which their last date would be then the 31st of March. So that is why the gap of that about 90 days is simply for period of participation stuff. But that's why we then capture it in the following, which is why we go from 4-1 to that 630 in that following year. So it's a unique cohort. It's not going to necessarily be, but it does give you a fairly accurate representation of how many students are going and leaving each program year. Employment second quarter and the median earnings are the same as table 5, and the employment fourth quarter and the credit rate is again the same cohort as table 5. Other NRS tables, I'm not going to go over those as they are very specific to what they are, but table 8 deals with family literacy students if you have that grant. Table 9 deals with integrated English literacy and civics education, or what we call our IELCE students. Again, that's another grant. If you have that, you'll be wanting to take a look at that. 10 is for our correctional facilities, specifically our 2 prisons, but also if you have a jail, you'll want to take a look at table 10, as that will show you what your students are doing inside of the correctional facility. And table 11 deals with our IET. Again, IET is not grant-based. Any program can have an IET. However, there are specific components in which makes it to where we can mark a student as IET. I'll be honest, I'm not great at that. Talk with Danny and Steph about that. They will gladly give you the information on what qualifies as an IET course. Any questions on NRS? We've got about 12 minutes, and I'm going to kind of talk about some of the rest of the reports inside of the system. Stephanie?
Yeah, I was going to add Jeff to that list since how he's actually our IET guru now.
Yes, that is. Thank you. Jeff, I don't think is on this call right now, but Jeff is our newly employed for adult education IET guru, and he will help you with all of the IET questions that you do have. Okay, any questions about NRS before I jump? Okay. All right, let's talk about some of the reports that we do find inside of UASIS that are not federal wise. First report I'm going to talk about is students who need a pretest. Now, again, as I mentioned back at the very beginning, all reports are permission based. So if you as a user do not have cannot access this, you don't have the permission to do it. If you are a director or a program admin, you probably should have access to this. If you are not one of those, then this may not be something that you do. But I am going to still go over most of the reports that are inside of the system as of right now. So students who need a pretest are students who need that pretest. However, if you have assigned a provisional EFL for the student, they're also going to show up on here as the best way we want to capture these students are with a pretest. So you'll see on this report that I have a couple of students that are provisionally based. They're ABE level 6s, and that's fine. We've mentioned with programs before that you can, if you know that they're an ABE level 6 because of a past test, you can assign them an ABE level 6 provisional. So they're going to probably, these students are going to stay on here, and that's fine. But if you assign a student, say an ABE level 3, you are going to want to try to get that student tested as quickly as possible or as reasonably possible. But we are going to show them on here so that you are aware that you do have students assigned as a provisional test for your program. They need to be added. Students who can post-test. Students who can post-test are those students who have 40 hours within your program. Now, the way this report runs is it runs all student tests within the program, and then it calculates the number of hours for each of those tests. So yes, the default is 40, but say, for example, you want to see students who are coming up on that 40, go ahead and change that hour since test to 35, export it into Excel, and look at those 35 to 39 students. And those are your students that are coming up on post-test. Maybe you want to get them scheduled. Maybe you want to make sure that they're still attending. Whatever your situation happens to be, you can see students that are below 40, but the default is 40. If inside of your program you find that your students are getting a lot of hours really quickly, we don't want you to overtest your students every 40 hours. Maybe push it to 50, 60, 70, 80 hours, whatever it happens to be. Go ahead and change that from 40 to 50 hours, or from 40 to 80 hours, for example, and you can end up seeing that. One thing on this report that is coming out, and I did have it, apologize, I had it up and running. I can't pull it up right now, otherwise it'll take me too long. There's going to be a new checkbox on here that will allow you to remove students over 150 hours. The idea behind this is for programs or students that have transitioned from tests. So say, for example, you as a program have transitioned from CASAS Life and Work to CASAS Steps. Those life and work will still continue to show on here because you are still working with that student and that period of participation hasn't ended. However, you're moved on to a new test. You don't want to see those. That's fine. You can click that checkbox and they'll be removed once the student hits over 150 hours. It's been some feedback that we want to be able to remove these, and this is the best way we found it. We'll get some feedback. Again, this should go live next week. And so you can start using that as you start testing just before the holidays. Hopefully, I'm expecting some feedback about, yes, this works for what we need, or we want to change this slightly. But for those that do run this, please keep an eye that is going to be coming out shortly. Just keep an eye out that. Nikki, you have a question?
Yes. So is there a way to filter like who has already post-tested?
No, there is not a way currently to do that. That is probably something we should add. Chris, are you going along with the same line or different question?
Different question.
Okay, give me just a second.
Sure.
So no, we actually don't currently pull that information. That's not something, but that is something we could probably add onto here. Let me make a quick note about it because my note taker is not here. And
So I would just like to, I mean, yes, I want to post-test people if they have enough hours, but if they've already been post-tested, I would like to focus on people that haven't.
Nope, and that makes a lot of sense. I'll be honest, I'm not sure why I have yet to program or why I don't have that flag inside of there, but I will get that flag added on there. And I'll probably be able to also add to whether the student has an EFL MSG or whatever their most recent MSG is, just so that you're aware as well. Because again, like you said, if they have enough hours, sure, you want to post-test them, but again, let's focus on those that we haven't post-tested or don't have an EFL yet. Chris, question?
Yeah, just going back to what you were talking about previously with flagging the 150 hours. Is there a reason why 150 hours was chosen, or was it just a random number?
It's a random number. It was an arbitrary number that we came up with. If we find that we need to go up or down that, then we definitely can change the way the programming works. But no, it was just an arbitrary 150 hours is what we chose.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. You'll find that there's numbers throughout the system that are there that are arbitrarily put. Some of them, yes, like 12 hours and 90 days, those are NRS standard rules. But some of the other stuff, oh, and of course, like the 40 hours, that's testing policy kind of stuff. But something like that, that's just an arbitrary rule. So where if we find that later down the road that we need to change it, maybe we need to go higher, maybe we need to go lower, we can do so. So, okay, that's our post test. So again, keep an eye out for that check mark. It'll be coming out shortly. Student class list. This is a report that simply shows all students that have been active in that class. Again, not just those that are currently active, but have been enrolled in that class. You'll be able to tell those students differently that because of this removed date. But what this is this shows you really good on kind of who the students are, their overall summary, contact information. Maybe you've got maybe you want to make sure you've contacted these students because you want to post test these students. Whatever the situation happens to be, you can utilize this. This is not a role, but you can utilize it at that, just removing those students that have a removed date. Can we get, yes, Jamie asked the question, can we get a report that shows students who haven't been enrolled in a class? It's going to be kind of like that. What our plan to do is we're going to have students that are currently enrolled in a class, not just haven't been, but are not currently enrolled in class. We do have that on our list to do. It'll probably come out, it'll probably come January would be my thought. Just because I know we have a couple of other reports that program or that people are wanting, and we have a priority list. So yes, we do have it coming. Again, it'll be part of the email once we do get it, and it will be a permission based as well. But yes, we do plan on building one. Student achievements. This is a good report to see what your students are doing, what they have achieved. Adult education diplomas, have they earned those? Civic tests, have you marked those for all of those students? And GEDs. This is a good report to see who's passed your GEDs. I know that there's not a notification of when a student passes, but the report will show you. One thing I do want to report about this report is if you have had a student that has been in your program at all, even last year, a year ago, whatever it happens to be, and they finally pass their GED, they will show up on here. So you can't necessarily take this report and compare it to, say, NRS Table 4 to see all of those HSE, MSGs, because we could show you a student who has passed that was in your program and has just recently passed. So keep that in mind that you may see students that are no longer active in your program this year may show up on that GED because they have now passed. We've gotten feedback both ways, and it was kind of an overwhelming. We want to see those students, and so that's why it's been programmed the way it is. Pending student demographics. This report will show you students that you've changed something in their demographics. And it needs to be approved. I am aware of a couple of bugs that some of the columns are not showing on here. I am working to get those fixed. However, I will get them fixed, but this report is kind of going away. We are going to change the process in which if you as a staff member update the student's demographics, it's automatically going to be entered into the student's profile. As we bring a student portal online and we allow students to update their profiles, this will become a piece that you will need to approve. We don't want someone simply changing their last name to whatever because they think it's funny, or changing their phone number, address. We want you to just verify that information, that demographic information is correct. So the pending demographic approvals will still be there. I will fix the bugs inside of it, but it is going to go away for when you update a student's demographics. That will be coming out probably in the next month or so as we get into that. The GOAT report. The GOAT report is a fantastic report. It kind of shows you pretty much everything inside of the system. This does not display on the system. There was too much lag It pulls a lot of data. Again, you see it currently has 89 columns that it pulls, one different column for each unique thing. Has demographic information, residency documents, social security, just whether they have an SSN, and pop details. It gives you a lot of information about the student's pop details, when they started, if they've exited. A student could potentially show up on here more than once if they have more than one enrollment inside of the program year. So do keep that in mind. It's not going to give you a unique count, but it can show you how many students you have worked with. And again, if a student shows up twice, it would make sense to actually have them inside of there. I think this is the last one that I have, is your separation notice. The separation notice is a list of students who are over 90 days, but below 105 days, which is when the auto separation process kicks off. This will give you a list of the students, and it shows you kind of a couple information: primary phone numbers, enrollment details, last activity date. That way, if you want to contact these students and say, hey, we want to get you back before, things roll, before you have to, come in and do everything brand new again, this is a good way to do it. If you know that student is done, go ahead and click the checkbox, select the reason why you're separating them. Let me know if they're still incarcerated or not. That's for my jails. And then hit save at the top or bottom, and it works. Again, this is a good report to kind of say who's coming up on or who's about to be separated. We do have an idea to have a report that shows who hasn't had any sort of activity in the last X amount of days. So a student, before the student shows up here, you can run that report so that you can capture them before they end up showing up on here. Again, that will come out in the near future. GED data match. I know it's not a report, but it is one that most programs seem to miss. This is a report that shows you when we end up matching with something on the GED side. On the one side, you'll see the UASIS information. On the other side, you will see the GED information. If this is the student, if this is the correct student, go ahead and hit approve. It adds the student's GED ID to the student's information, and it goes on. That doesn't necessarily mean that the student has passed their GED. It simply means that the student has created a record. So again, if Billy is on here, I hit approve. Billy may not have passed all four. He may have only passed one as of today or whenever this information came through. It also could be he simply signed up for the GED profile, and that's about as far as he got. So keep in mind that simply approving here does not mean they have pass their GED. It just means that we are looking to make sure that when they do pass it, the data match will automatically happen. I'm going to leave this here. I am recording this so you can go back to this, but these are upcoming reports. Our review hours one is one that is going to be coming out next week. It's good information. You can review it when it does come out. But these are other reports that we do plan on releasing here in the next few months. Reports are a little bit easier to do than some of the features outside of UASIS. So I usually tend to try to get 1 or 2 reports released for each one of those. Okay. Any other questions? I see one that just came up. Where would we find the GED data match? The GED data match is, so when you click on students on the side, up at the top, you will see students, separation notice, and GED data match. This page is permission based. If you do not see it on your side, then either ask for it or assign it to yourself. This was a new one since we released, so however, this should be given to all directors and program admins. So Allison, I know you should see this, but this is under students. Up at the top, it's next to the separation notice. Same location that you'll find the list of students, which is that very first tab. Thank you for asking, Matt. Okay, any other questions? Okay, I apologize for going over today. Again, we've got a lot of reports, and you can see this list is going to just increase. As I mentioned at the very beginning, I can probably do the same type of thing next year, but I'm going to have to split it into multiples just because of the amount of reports. And I don't have really a whole lot of time to have discussions about any of these reports, but if you do have any questions on them, please email the webmaster. We are happy to answer those questions, look into anything that you that you feel is kind of funky, or if you don't understand any of those questions. We have all the business rules. Alex is actually programming in the business rules for each of these reports. If there's anything that is unique about them, she's going to program those in. That way you are aware of what the business rules are, and we're very clear about how we're pulling these students and why these students are showing up on these reports. So, okay, thank you guys for coming. We will not hold one. Nope, we will hold one next month. I apologize. We will have one more this year before the holiday breaks, and then we will go ahead and have a good holiday. So enjoy Thanksgiving next week. We will see you guys, and this recording will be on YouTube tomorrow. Thanks.